Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am Brian Love, head of the Travillian Group's Banks and Depository Recruiting Practice. I focus on helping community banks, credit unions, and other diversified financials all around the country with their talent advisory, succession planning, and executive recruitment needs. I'm excited today to welcome Jeff Cardone from Luse Gorman. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. And if you'd like to maybe introduce yourself to our audience, that'd be great.
Sure. So as Brian introduced me, I'm a partner at Luse Gorman. Luse Gorman is a Washington, D.C. based law firm, and we specialize in representing community banks and other financial institutions, really in corporate, regulatory, and compensation matters are our primary practice areas, really with an emphasis on transactions, M&A, capital raising transactions, from mutual stock conversions, sub-debt deals. We're sort of we've been an industry leader in the M&A space for 5 consecutive years, also in the capital markets as well. So, it's a real pleasure to be here, and thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure to have you. And we get along well because we're kind of bank geeks, and we are very passionate about the space. Wanted to talk about, 3 or 4 different, topics. Right off the top here, I think the big one is, M&A. It's a little bit down this year, but there's still some pretty interesting deals that have been announced. Wanted to get your take on that.
Sure. So I think from an M&A perspective, I would agree. I think the markets or the M&A is starting to soften a bit. I mean, you see some deal announcements. I think but as you alluded to before, deals are definitely down. Roughly since the financial crisis, you had roughly about 250 mergers a year. And this year we're up to, I believe 74 deals based on, S&L. So obviously deal flow is definitely down. Certainly the short term, obviously COVID has been a primary issue on that. It's just hard to get real deal certainty on some of the pro forma metrics, whether, how accretive the deal is going to be to earnings on a pro forma basis or tangible book value dilution. So I think that's been challenging in the M&A markets. But I would say the big long-term challenge affecting bank M&A from our perspective is the fact that bank stock prices are just so down. And they're trading below book value. And I think that's going to be a big challenge. So, the traditional seasonal acquirers, in that, I'd say $1 billion to $5 billion range, we're buying that community bank at, $500 million to $1 billion, and they want to use stock as their currency. That's just going to be a big challenge because you're trading below book value or tangible book value. It's going to be so dilutive to your shareholder base. It's just basically it's putting them on the sidelines. Now the one positive to that for banks that, are really well capitalized, you'll start seeing credit unions, where you have excess cash, you're going to see I'd see an increase of those types of deals that are happening. And then certainly you'll see MOEs, where merger of equals, and really an MOE, it's never really a true merger of equals, but generally there's an expectation that there's not going to be a premium involved. So I think those are going to be the 2 type of deals that, are going to continue, the MOE and the cash deals. But I think generally it's going to take some time for the M&A market really to come back, even as COVID abates, because bank stock prices are, with interest rates being low and margin compression. That's going to be that's the big macro challenge in the bank M&A space right now.
Sure. And I know you and Luse Gorman have worked on some pretty interesting deals, MOEs this year. You and I have also spoken about how succession planning is a huge hot topic that sometimes is the catalyst for some of these transactions. Can you tell me how boards are thinking about succession planning?
Yeah, and that's a great point. And, we do as a firm, a lot of, strategic planning sessions and a lot of conversations I have at board, whether talking about M&A or capital planning or the regulatory environment. I always start or really highlight the importance of succession planning. And I think the one kind of flaw in the boardroom, succession planning generally, and you're probably more an expert to this than we are, really the focus is on, okay, who's our next CEO going to be, maybe right. CFO, it's sort of at the management level, but really that succession plan has to address all areas of the organization, particularly in the boardroom, where you're going to find your next directors. And probably most importantly, in the context of M&A, is shareholder succession, particularly if you're a real closely held institution. Because we have a lot of clients where you have a small number of shareholders, could be family-owned institutions and whatnot. And that's always going to be a challenge, when that shareholder, either unfortunately passes away or, he or she is looking for a liquidity event. Well, what is a bank going to do in that scenario? And a lot of times that leads to a sale. If banks are sort of not proactively planning to deal with that. So certainly I always recommend a board. That's got to be really at the forefront of your strategic plan is your succession plan.
Sure. And there's a lot of disparity I see when we're talking to boards and executives, some very proactive on their succession front, some not so proactive. And then sometimes we hear about those banks selling, of course. But it's actually, the process of succession planning is to have an internal process and to have an external process kind of happen concurrently, where you can assess that second layer, that management team below, while you're also surveying the areas, around you for talent. And so that's an important point. And also, as you mentioned about shareholder succession as well.
Yeah. And Brian, one thing I would add in succession from what we've seen, I think the most successful succession plans, particularly at the management level, are the organizations that are developing talent from within.
Sure.
You got to bring in external candidates. Not that it doesn't work out. It just makes it it just takes more time. It's hard to assess if cultures are aligned versus if you're training somebody and he or she, becomes, moves up the ranks in the senior management role. That tends to be the most efficient, mechanism for success, at least at the management level, from what we've seen.
Agreed. That cultural fit is so important, and it's sometimes difficult in external hires. It's near and dear to our heart to stay connected with younger talent that's out there if there is an external hire, even niche talent around technology, credit, compliance. We stay in touch with all sorts of that type of talent. But moving on here, Jeff, another topic I know that's near and dear to your heart is capital planning, strategic planning around capital, risk management, those types of things. Can you give me your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll tell you what we've been seeing in the capital markets. There's a big time uptick in sub-debt deals. Certainly common equity has been virtually non-existent just because, again, the bank stocks have been so compressed. Outside of the mutual stock conversion space, we've been seeing an uptick in those deals as well. But sub-debt has really taken off, I think, for various reasons. I think number one, I think the regulatory capital rules make it more favorable. The small bank holding company policy statement went from $1 billion to $3 billion, and the benefit to that is if you're less than $3 billion, you don't have to satisfy minimum holding capital requirements at the holding company. And as a result of that, you can use, holding companies can use sub-debt, can leverage debt the holding company, downstream that cash that comes into the bank, it's tier one capital, and that debt doesn't count against the institution. So for institutions under $3 billion, particularly that are not publicly traded, don't have access to capital markets vis-a-vis common equity, sub-debt has sort of been a really nice tool in that regard. And also help, kind of enhancing sub-debt has been the low interest rate environment. Pricing's been very good.
Sure.
The vast majority of the deals have come in below 6%, and that's pretty cheap cost of capital. And also you're factoring that the interest you pay on the debt is tax deductible as well. So I think that's been a primary driver to that. And also the other element to sub-debt is from a political standpoint, you're not diluting your existing shareholder base. So for some of these, we talked about succession planning with closely held institutions, some of these organizations do not want to add new shareholders. So sub-debt from a political standpoint makes capital raising more feasible than, a more traditional common equity raise.
It's a good point on that dilution piece. And obviously this capital, we've seen a lot of banks investing in their technology. Right now there's an uptick in our searches with technology. We're working on a pretty progressive bank CTO search right now, which is a lot of fun. And because of everything that's happened this year, technology is front and center, having to deliver the bank mobily, online, having to push all your employees to work remotely. These are all things that are dependent on technology. Are you seeing a lot of the clients you're advising, pushing a little further into that technological piece?
No question about it. That's certainly front and center in strategic plans or capital plans from a strategic planning standpoint. Certainly that. Obviously, trying to grow organically, trying to grow vis-a-vis acquisitions, whether it's merger or sort of more measured acquisitions, is part of the capital plans. I mean, you see also, I would say right now too, probably the bigger driver than I would say even the technology piece is just from a defensive standpoint. Because again, because capital's so low, there's a lot of still uncertainty with, loan portfolios and asset quality deterioration. Banks are just trying to kind of keep their, capital reserves in good place just so that they're ready to rock and roll and respond just in case there's an adverse situation. But no, technology is definitely going to be front and center without question. And I think you're sort of evidence of the investment technologies is you're seeing a lot of the banks, trying to get rid of branches, with their mobile banking and all their technology platforms. From an efficiency standpoint, there's just really not a need for the branches. So you're seeing a lot of divestitures in that regard.
Yeah, just over the last 2 months, the announcements I've seen, it's basically every week, it's some bank announcing 15%, 20% shrinkage in that branch network. So that's a good point.
Brian, one thing I would add though on the branch, on an acquisition standpoint, for smaller institutions that are trying to get market share and whatnot, and you've been also credit unions as well have been trying to do is branch deals in that regard may make some sense. Because the larger institutions are trying to cut costs. But for smaller institutions, it may be a way more efficiently to do that vis-a-vis an acquisition than to try to, establish a branch, a DeNovo branch. So
that's a good point. Yeah. And also that kind of brings us to another topic of how to be opportunistic right now. And I'm sure you're seeing some banks that aren't just buckling down and being reactive. Proactivity seems to be the name of the game. So how are banks being proactive right now?
Yeah, and what I always advise boards and banks, obviously, unfortunately, you can't go to conferences, but, cultivating relationships leads to a lot of deals. I mean, certainly you can go to the traditional route and hire an investment banker, and certainly they do a great job of finding deals, but a lot of deals that come to fruition is just conversations, bank CEOs and board members just having friendly relationships and just being proactive. So for banks that are looking to expand, or if they have any ideas or they have certain branches that may make sense, it may warrant reaching out and setting up a lunch meeting or having a conversation just to kind of, let other institutions know that, you're looking to do stuff. And that really does lead to deals. I can tell you. I mean, it really probably almost as much as again the traditional route of bank looking to sell branches, putting out a book, and acquirer comes in and puts their bid. The traditional route, but a lot of times deals come to fruition in sort of what I call the untraditional way of just friendship and conversation.
Yeah, agreed. And I think at heart, you and I are both relationship managers, and it's important to us that we have long-lasting relationships with our clients. There's no substitute, even though this is fine and dandy, this Zoom meeting. There's no substitute for being in the same room with someone. I almost think there should be like a surprise ending to this video where you and I are actually sitting next to each other. I think that would be kind of funny.
We have to have our masks on though.
Yeah, exactly right. Social distancing. So it's an election year. Obviously, that's we're a month, not only just about a month away from this election. What are some of your thoughts from the legal perspective of ramifications from a continued Trump presidency or a Biden presidency?
Yeah, I will say, starting really in 2016, obviously through today, definitely has been, real, I would say a positive change, or I wouldn't say positive is the right word, really sort of a softening of the regulators. Again, part of it is obviously, you have obviously a more conservative administration in the Trump administration, the Obama administration, but I think really more so than that, it's really been, we're just 10 years plus removed from the financial crisis. So regulators are not there's not this hyper concern of being burned by market failures. I mean, banks are probably healthier than ever, which is evidenced by the fact you're seeing a very minimal number of bank failures. Banks are very much well capitalized. So the health of the industry it's really couldn't be better in that regard. So I think that's given regulators sort of a sense of comfort. So we've sort of seen a softening, in that regard, just a more streamlined process in terms of, the regulatory approvals. I will tell you that one thing with M&A, while putting aside 2020, while the number of deals remained consistent over the last 10 years, about 250, what you saw pre-2016 was the aggregate deal values went down substantially. So you were seeing a lot more smaller deals, but a lot of the larger deals were on the sidelines because of the regulatory approval environment.
Right.
Post 2016, that trend has changed. You're seeing larger, you saw BB&T and SunTrust, for example, some of these large MOE transactions. Part of that is we're just in a little bit more softer regulatory environment. And so with that being said, and you gave a lot before, going about the election, I think with the Trump reelection, I would expect, again, qualifying all this with COVID, I would expect all that to continue. I think Biden is sort of the great unknown in my view. I think in terms of, the tone of the regulators, because obviously, he's going to appoint different folks than obviously the Trump administration. I think you're going to see the regulators be more proactive, obviously in consumer protection and compliance, which is near and dear to the more liberal wing of the Democratic Party. And, you're going to see a real emphasis on the regulators trying to deal with, to right some of societal's wrongs with respect to, income inequality, racial inequality, et cetera. So we shall see. I mean, I think that's a big unknown and a big wild card is how is Biden going to be more, in the Bill Clinton mode, or is the more liberal ring going to really drive policy in the banking space? And, unfortunately, that is just unknown at this point.
Yeah, we will see. One other topic I just wanted to kind of get into is the flip side of M&A, which is DeNovos, right? New banks that are starting. And, I've talked to a lot of people and, I don't know how bullish people are on DeNovos right now. I know you're helping with a few different banks and organization. And this, parlays into the regulatory and economic, moment that we're in. What's your take on, de novo replenishment out there? Is it going to happen?
Well, I don't think it's going to be to the level it was, pre-financial crisis. Certainly, I think in certain market areas, we started to see, activity, particularly in the Southeast, where you've had a lot of, first there was a smaller number of banks generally in certain states, and then with a lot of the economic growth going on there, a lot of big M&A transactions, there was sort of been a need for some of the local banks. So you saw sort of a bit of uptick in de novo activity. And certainly the FDIC, I know they were really pushing, or trying to soften some of their rules in terms of, de novo formations. I think there's a recognition that, consolidation has been, obviously very prevalent. And so they want to make sure that the needs of customers are being served. I think the big challenge with de novos is really twofold. One is capital.
Yeah.
Can you raise enough capital? And, generally speaking, you probably need close to $20 million as sort of the marker. And secondly, and this is in your world, is talent.
Yeah.
Are the regulators going to be comfortable with the management team that you have? And I mean, if you really can't address those two issues, it's going to be very challenging to successfully get a de novo deal done. But the talent piece is very, very important because regulators are without question going to be focused on that. Is who's your management team, who's your CEO, what type of experience does he or she have, et cetera. So.
Right. Yeah. And I think there's about 15 in organization announced this year, which, is a nice number, but, it's also, we've helped a lot of recapitalizations and de novos over the years. And there's this entrepreneurial talent that also needs to have some, positive reputation with the regulators. That's hard to find. I'd like to say that we keep in touch with a lot of those folks. So that's a good point that you make. Well, I think that about wraps us up for today. If you had any parting words or any thoughts, now's a good time, Jeff.
No, the theme, besides, we talked about succession planning. My theme to boards and the management teams I talk to is just being proactive, being prepared. Whether it's from a capital planning standpoint, from an M&A perspective, for institutions, for example, that want to be acquisitive, you certainly want to avoid just-in-time capital. And again, you just never know when an opportunity arises. And the question is, are you as a management team or you as a board, are you prepared? And, and just also understanding, what can we realistically do strategically and whatnot? Like for example, we talked about before with sub debt and capital markets. If common equity is not on the cards because of your organization, just have an understanding of that and be fully aware of what are our options, to the extent we need to raise capital. Similarly with M&A, what are our, are there any particular price points where we're not going to pay? Are there particular markets we're not willing to go to, et cetera, et cetera? Just, again, just having those conversations and just being prepared leads to better deal success.
That's the overarching theme here is being proactive. And it was a pleasure talking to you today, Jeff. Always fun to pick your brain and hear your perspective. And thank you for being here.
Pleasure to be here, Brian. Thank you. And maybe next time we can do it in person.
There we go. And here's the big reveal that actually Jeff is right. Oh, no, he's not. That's my kid. That's my kid doing math out there. Anyway, thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Brian. Take care.
Have a great day.